It's funny how people decide who you are before you've even said a word. It's even funnier, no, tragic when they're so sure. They're willing to bet their dignity on it. The first laugh echoed before I even sat down in the courtroom. A short, sharp chuckle from one of the officers at the prosecution's table. The other followed with a smirk, whispering something that made them both shake with silent laughter. It wasn't hard to guess me skin had always been an open invitation for assumptions. The case was simple on paper. At least, that's what they thought. Blackmail, caught trespassing. Probably some gang nonsense. The paperwork was neat, the story rehearsed, the prejudice polished to perfection. All they needed was for the judge to sign the stamp of guilty and move on. They didn't know I wasn't the defendant. From the corner of my eye, I could see the defendant Marcus Johnson, 19, scared to the bone. His hands trembled on the table, chained together. The cuffs bit into his wrists every time he moved. He wouldn't even look at me when I introduced myself that morning. Maybe he thought I was just another public defender who'd been thrown his way, someone who'd meet him 5 minutes before court and tell him to plead out for a lighter sentence. The officer's laughter grew bolder when I opened my briefcase. One of them muttered, "What's next? He gonna wrap his opening statement?" I ignored it. I had bigger things to focus on. The judge entered. The bailiff called the room to order, and I could feel the weight of every eye pressing down on me. I wasn't just here to win a case, I was here to make sure every person in that room saw exactly what they didn't expect. We began with the prosecution's narrative, clean, efficient, rehearsed. They painted Marcus as a troublemaker who'd been lurking around a construction site at night. Suspicious behavior, they said. Likely casing the place for theft, they said. Not a shred of actual evidence. Just a boy in the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong skin. Then it was my turn. I walked to the center of the courtroom slowly, letting the silence stretch just enough to make them uncomfortable. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, "I could stand here and tell you that Marcus Johnson is innocent. But instead, I'm going to show you that the people who put him in those chains never cared about the truth to begin with." A ripple of murmurs swept the room. I could feel the officers shift in their seats. One crossed his arms. The other tried to smirk, but his jaw tightened. We started with the footage security cameras from the construction site. It showed Marcus walking through the lot, holding his phone up like he was recording. 10 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled in. No burglary tools. No bags. No sign of breaking and entering. Just a kid. Walking. The prosecution tried to spin it, but I wasn't done. I pulled up the second piece of evidence, Marcus's phone records. That night, he'd been live-streaming a video blog for his architecture class, talking about the structural design of the site. He'd tagged the location, time-stamped the post. It was all there. The judge's eyebrow twitched. The officers' faces began to lose their color. And I hadn't even gotten to the best part. "Officer Daniels," I said, turning to the taller of the two, "you stated in your report that you approached Marcus because he was acting suspicious. Could you define that for the court?" He squirmed. "Well, he was, looking around." "Looking around," I repeated, letting the words hang. "Like someone studying a building for a class project?" He stammered. "That's not," I cut him off. "And Officer Miller, in your body cam footage." I clicked the remote, and the court saw exactly what I had seen the first time. Marcus standing still, trying to explain himself, and the officers cutting him off, laughing, one of them muttering, "These kids never learn." The room went still. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The only crime Marcus committed that night was being young, curious, and black. For the first time, Marcus looked at me. His eyes glistened not with hope yet, but with the shock of someone realizing that maybe, just maybe, someone believed him. But the fight wasn't over. I still had to dismantle the wall the officers had built around their story, brick by brick. I paced slowly, speaking directly to the jury. If we allow suspicion without evidence, if we allow prejudice to stand in for proof, then none of us are safe. Today it's Marcus. Tomorrow it's your son, your brother, your neighbor. I could see it landing. Some jurors leaned forward. One of the officers clenched his jaw so tight, I thought he might break a tooth. And I knew, deep down, that we were only at the beginning. The real blow was still coming. The prosecution wasn't ready to give up. They tried to slide back into familiar territory, the old, worn playbook that had worked for them 100 times before. Counselor, the district attorney, a wiry man with a sharp nose and a voice that carried like a whip crack, began. You're trying to distract this court with theatrics. The officers had every reason to be cautious. It was late. The area is known for break-ins. Your client, I stepped forward before he could finish, is not my client. The words dropped like a brick into a still pond. The judge tilted her head slightly, as if she'd heard something she wasn't sure she caught. The DA blinked. The jury turned toward me with renewed interest. What do you mean? The DA asked, narrowing his eyes. I mean, Marcus Johnson is not my client. He is my case. I volunteered for this trial. I chose to stand here today because what's on trial isn't Marcus, it's the truth. And I'm not going to let it get buried under lazy assumptions and old habits. The courtroom had shifted. I could feel it. When Marcus was first brought into the holding cell that morning, he had avoided my gaze like the floor tiles were more trustworthy. His mother had called me in tears 3 nights ago. She'd been a janitor in the law office where I was interning during my final year abroad, and she'd once brought me coffee during an all-nighter. You don't owe me anything, she'd said, but you're the only person I can think of who might care. I did care, and I knew exactly what she meant. Now, back in the courtroom, I saw her in the gallery, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. When our eyes met, she nodded once. A silent plea, a silent trust. The DA moved on, calling Officer Daniels to the stand. The man strode up with a stiffness that looked like pride to the untrained eye, but to me, it was the stiffness of someone who'd been rattled. He was sworn in, and the questioning began. The DA guided him gently, like a coach easing his player back into the game. Officer Daniels, can you tell the court what you observed on the night of March 18th? The officer recited his script. I observed a male individual walking near the construction site. He appeared to be surveying the area. Given the time of night and recent reports of theft in the area, I deemed it necessary to investigate. Necessary to investigate, I repeated when my turn came. Tell me, Officer Daniels, what about Marcus Johnson's behavior that night suggested he was about to commit a crime? The pause was long enough for the judge to look up from her notes. Well, he was, looking around. Looking around, I echoed. Would you say that anyone looking around a building at night should be detained? He hesitated. Not anyone, no. So what made Marcus different? Daniel's eyes flickered just for a second toward Marcus's skin. He didn't say it out loud, but the silence was louder than any slur. I let the jury sit with that. Next, I brought out the body cam footage again. But this time, I didn't just show the laughter. I slowed the playback, freezing frames to point out details, the way Marcus's hands were in plain sight, the way he didn't take a single step toward the officers, the way he was interrupted every time he tried to explain. Tell me, Officer Daniels, I said, is this how you're trained to conduct an investigation? To mock the person you're questioning? To laugh before hearing their explanation? The DA objected, argumentative, but the judge overruled him. Daniels fumbled for words. Would you laugh at your own son like that if he were in Marcus's shoes? I asked, my voice dropping low. Daniels' jaw tightened. He looked away. Then came Officer Miller's turn. He was younger, sharper, and thought he was smarter. He swaggered to the stand like he'd been waiting all day to set the record straight. Under the DA's questioning, he delivered confident, clipped answers. But under mine, the cracks showed. Officer Miller, you wrote in your report that Marcus's behavior was evasive. Could you clarify what you meant? He avoided answering direct questions, Miller said. I pulled up the transcript from the body cam. Your first question to him was, quote, "What are you doing here, boy?" He answered, "I'm working on a school project." You interrupted him. Second question, "You got any tools on you?" He answered, "No, sir." You interrupted him again. Which part of that is evasive? Miller's face darkened. It's the way he said it. The way he said it. I repeated, stepping closer. You mean the way his voice sounded when 2 armed officers approached him at night, cutting off his every word? You mean the way his tone changed when you laughed in his face? The jury was watching closely now. One juror, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, leaned back with his arms crossed, studying Miller like he'd just realized something ugly. And then I went for the turn I'd been saving. Officer Miller, are you familiar with the concept of reasonable suspicion? Yes, he said, clipped. It requires specific and articulable facts, not just a hunch, correct? Yes. So where, in your entire interaction with Marcus Johnson, was the fact? Not your feeling, not your assumption. The fact. Miller said nothing. I let the silence stretch, long enough for everyone to feel the emptiness of his answer. When I sat down, Marcus's eyes were fixed on me like I'd just done something impossible. His hands had stopped shaking. The DA called one last witness, a community member, who claimed they'd seen Marcus in the area before. But under cross-examination, it turned out this person hadn't been anywhere near the site that night, and their sighting was from 2 months prior, in broad daylight, when Marcus had been riding his bike to school. By the time the prosecution rested, their case was no longer standing, it was crawling. It was my turn to close. I walked to the jury, slow and steady, making eye contact with each of them. You've heard the evidence. You've seen the footage. You've heard the laughter. And you know deep down that if Marcus Johnson were white, we would not be here today. We cannot call it justice when suspicion replaces proof, when prejudice replaces process. I took a breath. The officers thought they knew who Marcus was before he spoke a single word. They were wrong. And today, you get to decide whether we keep letting that happen or whether we stop it here, now, in this room. I stepped back. The defense rests. The jury would deliberate for hours. But I already knew we'd shifted the ground. The officers no longer looked smug, they looked cornered. And as I gathered my notes, I could feel the weight of their stares on my back. They still didn't know who I was. They didn't know that the kid they once stopped in this very town 15 years ago, mocking his accent, calling him boy, and telling him to stay in his lane, had grown up, gone abroad, and returned as a lawyer who now held their reputations in his hands. That was for later. The courtroom emptied faster than I expected once the judge dismissed us for jury deliberation. The hum of conversation filled the hallways like a low storm cloud, half curious, half restless. People lingered near the doors, wanting to see the ending of something they hadn't anticipated when they walked in this morning. Marcus stayed seated at the defense table for a long time, staring at the grain in the polished wood like it was a map out of his life. His mother moved toward him, but the bailiff blocked her with a gentle shake of the head. I packed my notes slowly, letting the moment breathe. You think? Marcus started, his voice low. You think they're going to believe me? I didn't answer right away. They don't need to believe you, I said finally. They just need to believe the truth. And we gave it to them. His brow furrowed, like that was a concept he'd never considered before, truth, standing on its own without someone having to beg for it. Outside the courtroom, the officers stood near the vending machines, speaking in hushed tones. Officer Daniels kept glancing over at me, his jaw twitching. Officer Miller tried to maintain a smirk, but every time someone walked past, his eyes darted toward them, checking for judgment. They were men used to being the loudest in the room now, they were background noise. I walked past them without slowing. Daniels muttered something under his breath, but I didn't catch it. Didn't matter. Hours passed. The jury requested to review the body cam footage again, then Marcus's phone records. Then they sent a note to the judge asking for clarification on reasonable suspicion. Each request chipped away at the prosecution's confidence. The DA sat at his table with his head in his hands, flipping through his binder like a man searching for a page that would save him from drowning. When the bailiff finally called us back in, the air in the room was heavy, thick with the anticipation of a dozen unspoken possibilities. Marcus sat straighter than I'd seen him all day, his mother in the front row, her hands clasped so tightly they looked like one. The jury filed in, faces carefully neutral. I watched them the way I'd been taught, overseas, eyes scanning for the twitch of a mouth, the shift of a shoulder. The foreman, a tall woman in a green blazer, held the slip of paper like it might burn her fingers. Madam Foreperson, the judge said, have you reached a verdict? We have, Your Honor. The paper was passed, read, and handed back. The judge's eyes flicked over it, unreadable. In the matter of the People versus Marcus Johnson, she read. On the charge of criminal trespass, we the jury find the defendant. A pause. Always a pause. Not guilty. The sound that came from Marcus's mother was somewhere between a sob and a prayer. Marcus exhaled so hard it was like he'd been holding his breath for months. I kept my face calm, but inside, I felt something click, something that had been waiting years for this. The judge thanked the jury, dismissed the court. People began to shuffle out, but I stayed seated, watching the officers. They weren't looking at Marcus. They were looking at me now, both of them, their expressions shifting from irritation to something else, confusion. I stood, gathered my briefcase, and walked past them. I didn't slow, but I didn't rush. Just enough time for the words to land. You don't remember me, do you? I said quietly. Daniels frowned. What? 15 years ago. Gas station on Willow Street. You stopped a kid for leaning on his bike outside. Said he looked out of place. I didn't look back to see if recognition hit. I could hear the silence. That was me. I walked out before they could answer. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. Marcus's mother was holding him, her tears soaking into his shirt. He looked at me over her shoulder, the beginnings of a smile breaking through the disbelief. You didn't have to do all that, he said when she finally let him go. Yes, I said simply. I did, because I remembered exactly how it felt to be him. To be young, black, and treated like you'd done something wrong just by existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. I remembered the humiliation that stuck to you like smoke, years after the fire had burned out. We stood on the courthouse steps for a while. Reporters were starting to circle, cameras clicking. A few people called out questions about the verdict, about the trial, about me. I didn't answer any of them. This wasn't my story to tell. It was Marcus's. And today, he got to walk away with the ending he deserved. But I also knew something else. This verdict wouldn't change everything. The system didn't crumble in a single afternoon. Daniels and Miller would keep their jobs. The DA would move on to the next case. And somewhere, another kid would get stopped for looking around. But maybe, just maybe, the people in that jury box, the ones who saw the laughter, who saw the truth, would carry it with them. And that was worth more than any headline. Later that night, when the courthouse was just another silhouette against the dark, I sat in my apartment with a single file folder on the table. Inside were names, dates, incidents, cases where suspicion had outweighed proof, where laughter had outweighed listening. This was just the first one. I poured myself a glass of water, set it down beside the folder, and started making calls. Tomorrow, there would be another courtroom, another fight, another truth to drag into the light. And the officers who thought a black teenager couldn't possibly be the one standing at the defense table feed keep learning. One trial at a time. The apartment was quiet, except for the faint hum of the fridge. Outside, the city had settled into that strange in-between where the night is too late for traffic, but too early for sunrise. I sat at my small kitchen table, staring at the file I'd left open. The names inside were more than just ink on paper. They were kids who'd been cuffed for loitering, men arrested for fitting a description, women pulled over for looking suspicious. Different ages, different places, but the same script. I thought of Marcus tonight, walking out of that courtroom into the cool evening air. I thought of his mother's tears, the way her hands trembled when she touched his face like she was checking to make sure he was real. Then, without meaning to, my mind drifted backward. I was 13 the first time it happened. Summer in my hometown meant the air was thick enough to drink. The cicadas screamed from the trees, and the pavement shimmered like a mirage. I'd been saving up for weeks to buy a used basketball from the pawn shop. The thing was scuffed and ugly, but it was mine. I was walking home, dribbling it, when the cruiser pulled up beside me. Where'd you steal that from, boy? I remember looking up, blinking against the sun. The officer stepped out, sunglasses hiding his eyes, hand resting on his belt. His partner leaned out the window, chewing gum slowly. I bought it, I said. My voice cracked not from fear yet, but from the awkwardness of being 13. Receipts. I didn't know you needed receipts for basketballs. They made me sit on the curb while they checked the pawn shop. I sat there for 20 minutes, sweat running down my back, as neighbors walked past pretending not to see. When they finally let me go, one of them said, "Be careful where you hang around. People might get the wrong idea." That night, I stuffed the basketball under my bed. I didn't touch it for months. The memory faded, but the feeling never really did. It was why, when Marcus's mother called me, I didn't hesitate. And it was why tonight, staring at the file, I knew I wasn't done, not by a long shot. The next morning, I walked into the community legal center where I'd been volunteering since I came back from overseas. The receptionist, a thin man with reading glasses perpetually sliding down his nose, looked up from his paperwork. "You were on the news," he said. "Courtroom footage. That closing statement view. You know they're calling you the Comstorm?" I snorted. "Catchy. They're also calling," he added, gesturing to the phone. "Nonstop." I glanced at the voicemail light, blinking like a heartbeat. More people, more stories. The list was growing. 2 weeks later, I was back in a courtroom. Not the same one, different city, different judge, same fight. This time it was a young woman, arrested for obstruction because she'd asked why her brother was being searched. As I stood there, building her defense, I caught a glimpse of Marcus in the back row. He wasn't hiding in the shadows anymore. He'd worn a clean shirt, and he was watching every move, every question. After the hearing, he walked up to me. "I want to learn," he said simply. "How to do what you do." I studied him for a moment. His eyes were steady, his shoulders straighter. He didn't look like the boy I'd first met in that holding cell. "You will," I said. Months passed. Cases came and went. Some we won, some we didn't. But each one left a mark in the people we defended, on the officers who learned we wouldn't fold, and on me. And then one afternoon, I got a call from an unfamiliar number. "Is this Attorney Carter?" "Yes." "This is Sergeant Daniels." I said nothing. I had just wanted to say. He paused, the silence stretching. "About that trial. I didn't see it then, but maybe I was wrong." It wasn't an apology. Not fully. But it was something. A crack in the wall. The real ending didn't come in a courtroom, though. It came on a warm Saturday in early spring at a community park. We'd organized a Know Your Rights event-free workshops, legal Q&As, food stalls. Marcus was there, helping set up chairs, carrying boxes of pamphlets. A group of teenagers wandered over, curious. One of them pointed to Marcus. "Hey, aren't you that guy from the trial?" "The one who—" "Yeah," Marcus said, grinning. "That was me. But I'm not just that guy anymore. Come on, I'll show you what to do if you ever get stopped." I watched from a distance as he talked to them, calm, confident, the way someone does when they've wrestled with the worst version of the system and walked away standing. For the first time in a long time, I let myself breathe. Later, as the sun dipped low and the park emptied, Marcus came over. "You think we can change it?" "The whole thing." I thought about the file on my desk, about the names still waiting for their day in court. I thought about Daniel's half apology, about the jurors who'd seen through the laughter, about the teenagers walking away with pamphlets in their hands. "Not in one lifetime," I said, "but maybe in 2 or 3, and maybe one of them will be yours." He nodded slowly, as if tucking the thought into his pocket for later. That night, I locked the office and stepped out into the cool air. The streetlights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows on the sidewalk. Somewhere in the distance, sirens wailed, part of the city's eternal soundtrack. I knew the fight wasn't over. It never would be. But for the first time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we weren't fighting alone anymore. And that was enough to keep going. Thank you for listening. If you find it interesting, please like and subscribe to follow the next stories.